This is Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi.
You know what we're getting really good at in this country? Pretending not to know what we've always known. Take the Epstein case. We've got dead victims, surviving victims, plain logs, black books, sworn testimony, and yet somehow we're still staring into the void, waiting for answers that never come. Or worse, answers we're told don't exist. This episode, we're going to go straight into that vacuum of truth with someone who's not guessing. Eric Faddis is a former prosecutor and current defense attorney, and he's been on both ends of the justice system's chessboard. Today, we're not just talking about the myth of the Epstein list. We're talking about the system's refusal to even define what it is. Because here's the question that keeps coming up. If a known trafficker was convicted of shuffling and shuttling victims to someone, then why don't we ever see the someone? Why was Ghislaine Maxwell convicted of trafficking minors to nobody? Why did Virginia Giuffre die with her allegations unresolved, her named abusers uncharged, and the courts conveniently silent? And why, after years of pledging transparency, does the government keep handing us redacted noise and minute-long surveillance clips that somehow always start and end just before anything happens? In this conversation, we're going to get into the core legal mechanics of why victim testimony, especially in sexual assault cases like this, isn't always enough to prosecute, and why, when it should be, it isn't. We talk about sealed evidence, prosecutorial distraction, and the ugly truth that when the names are big enough, the goal isn't justice, it's containment. And we will dig into whether the public is finally becoming desensitized to this scandal. Like if the list actually did surface tomorrow and it included sitting politicians, billionaires, cultural icons, would we just kind of scroll past it, nod knowingly, and, oh, look, another cat video? The public's faith in institutions is breaking because the institutions keep betting that we'll stop asking questions. But the problem with sweeping something under the rug is eventually you will run out of rug. And as you'll hear in this conversation, the prosecutors choose to limit the scope of a trial not because of facts, but because of whose facts might be implicated or who they might implicate. It's not incompetence, it's intent. So let's start there. Why didn't we learn more about Ghislaine Maxwell's trial? Why wasn't the client list exposed then, if it existed at all?
You know, it does appear that there were measures taken to shield not only Epstein, but also some of his alleged affiliates. But, you know, there is the dual sovereignty doctrine saying that both the federal government and local jurisdictions, including state, including potentially municipal jurisdictions, can still look into matters, can still conduct investigations, they'll bring charges even when one of those entities has provided immunity. And so that wouldn't prevent other governmental entities, law enforcement entities, from doing investigations. And I'll note, Tony, that usually when we're talking about sex assault, especially sex assault on a minor, there are not statute of limitations issues that come into play with that, at least in most jurisdictions. So it's not like it's too old to look into. It can still be looked into, and there's a question on everyone's mind as to why it's
Exactly, because there's some pretty big names on there. Virginia Giuffre, she's the one who just died. She named Prince Andrew, Alan Dershowitz. It's powerful testimony, but not always enough for a conviction. I mean, what sort of corroboration would be needed to move victim testimony from allegation to prosecution on some of these people? I mean, Dershowitz is still out there, and the allegation has been there forever. He, of course, has denied it. And there's a lot of other people out there who have accusations against them, too, never, ever been charged. But if you got someone saying, look, the logs, the records of them being there just don't exist, even though they do, you're going against the government on that one. And I don't know how you're going to really get anywhere at that point.
Yeah, Tony, sometimes the tragedy with sex assault cases is that it happens behind closed doors and the perpetrators have taken measures to conceal what happened. And so just an alleged victim's statement that was some sexual misconduct is probably not enough. If there were photographs proving that the individual was there in the vicinity at the time, if there was video, if there was corroborating testimony from other alleged victims or even workers at a place at which these alleged sexual assaults were happening, those could get you past the threshold to file a charge and proceed with a prosecution. But that's the thing, is that someone just coming forward and saying this happened oftentimes is not enough in the legal context.
Yeah, well, look at Diddy's, look at Cassie and her testimony, look at all that, and they still said, "Yeah, I think this is kind of like a domestic matter." Um, eh, why didn't Ghislaine Maxwell's trial reveal the client list? Why didn't we find out more out of all of that fiasco?
I think that was by design. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
But in such a trial, it would make sense to bolster one's case to be able to show, hey, Ghislaine Maxwell, you facilitated sex assault on a minor, and you did it with these people, with person one, with person two, with person three, with person four, and we have evidence regarding that. We have documentary evidence, witness testimony, that kind of thing. That would be a strong way to present that case. That's not really how it was presented. It was presented in the parameters, the scope of the presentation was rather limited, rather narrow. And again, the question is why? Is it to protect these rich and powerful people? And if so, what's the incentive behind protecting them? Why should we be doing that?
Well, exactly. Why? I mean, and I don't know if it just means that I think the fear a lot of people have is, well, a lot of people in super high places were involved in this. I guess my question today is, and is anyone going to be surprised? I mean, is this, if we found out tomorrow there's this huge list of names of people, big people, and on both sides, I'm not just going to say it's all Republican or all Democrat or whatever. Let's say the president's on it. Let's say a bunch of Democrats are on it, like high rank, like just across the board, tons of people. At this day and age, are we going to be shocked? I mean, is it going to be the shock that it would have been 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago? Today, if it happens, are people going to resign? Are people just going to deny it and move on? Because that seems to be what a lot of people do, especially when you don't really have, you're not going to have video, you're not going to have pictures, you're going to have text on a page. And all people have to do is say, well, that's not real, that's fake, that's false, and we move on. At the end of the day, if we do get this list, is anyone ever going to be satisfied with it being legitimate?
It's a great question. I think in our modern day and age, that folks would not be overly surprised to see what you've been describing. And then, for the government, if they were to disclose such information, there'd be a lot of pressure on them then to, hey, do we go after, let's say there are, 20 high-level politicians, entertainers, whatever, just hypothetically. Then there's a lot of pressure to prosecute or to take some legal action against these folks. That would be a Herculean effort, especially if we're talking about incidents that happened, more than a decade ago. We're talking about defendants who have more money than God, and they can resist these charges. And so I wonder if the government just said, gosh, if we release this, our next step is going to be so difficult and problematic and perhaps unsuccessful that we don't want to go down towards the end of that road. We just don't want to start on that path by releasing this list.
Are they screwing up even more by now talking about, here's a video we're going to release, and they released some security camera that has a minute of minute of footage missing. That's how it always does it. Nothing to see here. That's normal. And just expecting that cool. That sounds legit. And it doesn't really show anything. I'm surprised, like, why are we seeing this now? You said your camera wasn't working to begin with anyhow. Now suddenly you have this little video over here that shows something or nothing. And they're just, and the hell-bent approach on this, that it was suicide at the end of the day. That's what is, despite all of the evidence to the contrary. We have no camera, we have no guard, on a most high-profile person in custody at that moment in time, Yep, it was suicide and no questions asked. They have a very big credibility problem right now. Or do we have a very big conspiracy problem in our public where we are far more apt to not believe things that we just feel are kind of ridiculous considering the circumstances? Or is it a credibility? What's your thought? Because I guess it really could go either way.
Tony, I think we've got both of those problems. I think for one, with the advent of social media and sort of online investigators, some of whom are pretty darn savvy. I think a lot of folks aren't taking things at face value anymore, and they're looking into it for themselves. And so that's driving this. On top of that, perhaps the government just doesn't have all of the stuff that they or the public thinks they might have. And I think that's fueled a little bit by the government's sensationalism in the beginning, saying, "Hey, we're going to be transparent. We're going to show you. We're going to get to the bottom of all this corruption."
Yeah.
And then, lo and behold, they might not have it, and the public saying, "Hey, what the heck? We want to see this." And now their ears are perked too, and their expectations are unmet.
That's what I wonder about some of this. And in no way am I trying to downplay Epstein or Diddy or anything like that. But I do wonder if the sensationalism, if we in our minds as a public get this appetite and this image of, wow, this is going to be super, super crazy. And then at the end of the day, I mean, it's not good, but it's not, it's not to the level that everybody thinks it is. And I don't know how that could be in this case, considering all of the people who've come forward and all of the disturbing stories of Epstein, that it couldn't be to that level. But is this somewhat of an overblown case where we are expecting more than actually exists, and now we're just not getting it because it's not out there, or because we're getting too close to the center of the flame, right, where the gas is coming out and it's super, super hot?
I think the Diddy case is a decent analog for this issue. When that case began, there was all this hype that the prosecutor did a press release. There was sensationalism. We had the expectation there'd be like Caligula-esque, Roman orgies with, sex slaves and
Yeah.
drugs and guns and all this stuff. And then when we got to the case, was the federal case, it was a handful of threesomes, which were not at all what we expected. And so I think that there is sort of this driver in the media, in politics, and in society in general that are hyping up our expectations when the reality might be a little less shiny than
Yeah, a little more tame than maybe expected. So let's take stock of where we are. We have a convicted sex trafficker. We have documented victims. We have flight logs, black books, years of media reporting. But we're told there's nothing left to see here. No client list, no charges, and definitely no one else worth holding accountable. And if that sounds like closure to you, you're not listening close enough. What Eric laid out there today is more than just a breakdown of legal procedure. It's a map of how power protects itself. You heard how the law can demand corroboration from victims that will never be able to provide anything. How prosecutors can narrow the scope of a trial so precisely that the real predators never even make it into the room. How a government can claim transparency and then redact the truth into oblivion. But maybe the most dangerous thing here isn't obstruction. It's apathy. Because at this point, what would actually shock us? If tomorrow we saw the list, the names was startling. Sitting senators, CEOs, cultural icons. Would it do anything? Or would it just become another open tab on our device in the background while we scroll through the headlines about the next scandal? This is where the Epstein case has brought us, not just to the conspiracy, but to a credibility crisis. We don't believe the denials, we don't trust the releases, and when the DOJ tells us Epstein died by suicide with no working cameras, no alternative guards, and no explanation, we don't buy it. Not because we're paranoid, but because we've seen this story before. We're told not to expect more because the trail's too cold, or the victims are gone, or it's too late to prosecute. But as Eric pointed out, most jurisdictions don't have a statute of limitations on crimes involving minors. The truth can come out if anyone actually can get close enough to it. And that's the haunting part. It doesn't feel like a system that failed. It feels like one that performed exactly as designed. Minimize the damage, delay the truth, deny the list. So where does that leave us? Right here. Asking better questions, demanding smarter answers, and refusing to let the story fade quietly into the archives of unsolved scandals. Let us know in the comments section what you think of the list. Does it exist? Why aren't we seeing it? Who's on the list that we're not seeing it? I'm curious to get your thoughts. Let me know in the comments section on YouTube. If you're not already on YouTube, search Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi so you can join us there. But press subscribe wherever you're listening, on the podcast platforms, wherever it is. Hit subscribe, please, so you don't miss any of our reporting right here. We do greatly, greatly appreciate that. Until next time, I am Tony Bruschi. We will talk again real soon.
Want true crime coverage all day, every day? Press subscribe now to the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today and get the latest cases delivered right to your feed.